And we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View Live. This is the first time we are doing this, and it's such an honor to have our special guest with us tonight. And we have Joan Sedita. I personally have followed Joan for years. She was in the Reading First initiative as one of the experts on vocabulary, comprehension, and now many of you know her as an expert in writing as well. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Joan. Joan Sedita is an experienced educator serving in the roles of teacher, school administrator, teacher trainer, and literacy consultant since 1975. She has provided literacy professional development to thousands of educators and related professionals at schools, colleges, clinics, and professional conferences. Many of you know she is the founder of Keys to Literacy and is currently the CEO of the company. And she is the creator of the Writing Rope Framework and has written the very popular book on the writing rope. Her other books include The Key Comprehension Routine, The Key Vocabulary Routine, Keys to Content Writing, Keys to Early Writing, and Keys to Beginning Reading. And, the list goes on. We will post the full bio in the show notes. So welcome, Joan. Judy and I loved a blog. We love what you do, but there was a blog that stood out. It came out January 2024, and it's entitled "In Support of Main Idea and Comprehension Strategy Instruction." I don't know what just happened here. Are you with me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. I just saw you go into little boxes, but okay. Hopefully when you're talking, it'll switch. But the article again is "In Support of Main Idea and Comprehension Strategy Instruction." Joan, I want to just start off with a quote from your article to get us started. And you said, "I do not dispute that having background knowledge about the subject of text being read will support comprehension of that text. However, there is much more to comprehension than simply having background knowledge. And there is a large body of research over decades supporting comprehension strategy instruction, including teaching students how to identify and state main ideas. In fact, more recent research indicates that instruction focused on teaching comprehension strategies at the same time we build background knowledge is the best combination." So that's straight from your blog. Could you please talk about that a bit? About one, why you wrote this article, and then to get into that piece specifically.
Yeah, thank you, Faith and Judy, for giving me this opportunity to talk about this topic that I have been thinking about for a long time. And every month I write a blog, but to write this one for those who have a chance to end up reading it, you'll see that it wasn't just sharing my thoughts on it. I wanted to back it all up with research, and that takes some time. So, why did I write it? I've been in this field a long time, more than 40 years, and my work started a long time ago, mid-70s, at a place called the Landmark School for kids that have dyslexia, learning disabilities. And I was there for 23 years, teacher, administrator. I started the college program and worked over that time with thousands of students that had reading difficulties. And since then have been in schools working with thousands of kids that have difficulties. And the things that we were using back then, before we had a lot of the research to back it up, but that subsequently through the National Reading Panel and a whole host of meta-analyses of research that have happened since, bear out that explicit instruction of comprehension strategies, and there are a bunch of them, right? Summarizing always comes to the top of the list. But part of that includes teaching kids what a main idea is. You can't summarize without that, right? And so, after watching this explicit instruction of strategies, but also about text structure and showing kids literally paragraph by paragraph how to read closely, right? Not just ask them questions, but have them generate questions. So all the things that we know that come under comprehension, but also, learning throughout it all that if our students knew something about what they were reading, that would help them. And that ended up supporting a whole lot of things that we know are effective around previewing before kids read, previewing unfamiliar vocabulary, right? Giving kids just a general heads up about what you're talking about. I can remember, and some folks may be familiar with this, there was this activity, and I won't be able to do it from memory, but it was this quick little thing where you described something. It was like, it went something like this. The activity is not difficult to learn, but, it is not fun to do. You take things and you organize them, and then you reorganize them, and then you reorganize them a different way. And then when you're all done, it starts all over again. And you're going like, what are they talking about? And then all of a sudden you get this little point that it's about doing laundry. So that very simple preview of that's the topic, and then you can bring in what you know about it. So we've long known that if you know something about what you're reading, helps. So with this background in the trenches, working with kids directly, especially those that struggle, and then afterwards doing training all over the country, and over the years, seeing the research that supports that. I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with Sharon Vaughn out of U Texas in the Meadows Center, but she and Klinger developed the collaborative strategic reading 25 years ago, reciprocal teaching, right? So this research is around forever. All right, that's the background. But over the last couple of years, there has been more attention paid to the role of background knowledge, and it should. That's great. And in particular, the vocabulary that's connected to that background knowledge, right? So I'm really glad that that's come to the forefront, and we're supporting that. However, along with that, there are some folks in our field who focus on that and only focus on that. They focus on that like that is the answer, to the exclusion of everything else. And so I've just felt over the last couple of years, when I hear, and the other trainers at Keys to Literacy, when we're out there and teachers come up to us and say, I just heard we shouldn't be teaching strategies anymore. Or, oh, I heard teaching main idea is bad for kids. It's like, that's really hard to hear. So that's what pushed me to say, all right, no, I got to speak up about this, and let me write it in a way that I can bring in all the research that shows how effective comprehension strategies are. So it's a little bit longer answer than you wanted probably, but that's why I wrote it.
No, we want to hear from you, Joan. That's why you're here. We want to hear from you. So, Judy, I saw you holding up the cheers button. So, we have little BS buttons and cheers buttons so that when we like what we hear, we will let you know it. So, Judy, Joan had a lot to say about what the tone is out there. And she's been hearing it. I know I've been hearing it. I know you've been hearing it. So when we read this article, like, we have to do an episode on this, because this is not just Joan hearing this, that people are ignoring strategies or minimizing their importance as if that is the secondary piece where background knowledge is the primary thing that could get the job done. Any question you have for Joan right now based on what she said?
So first of all, I want to say I'm so excited to be here with you right now, Joan. The last time I saw you was in New York City. I was at the conference, the Everyone Read conference in New York City, and that was great to see you. But now I'm seeing you up close, and it's kind of personal. And I'm really excited. This is our very first time doing a live recording. So we're so honored to have you at this very special moment for the Literacy View. So questions for Joan. Well, first of all, I think it's amazing when so many educators hear Joan's name, we always think writing, but to hear Joan speak about comprehension, which goes along with writing, is so powerful. Just reading this article, it was like, it made so much sense to me because I can't understand how so many people in the field right now are thinking that just that knowledge building piece alone is going to shift the needle for kids. It didn't make sense for me, especially as we're moving in the science of reading to think about how we could be more explicit, how we could model. Just giving kids knowledge isn't going to do that. When we model something, we show kids how to do certain things very explicitly. And, I'm going to be honest, for many, many years, my main focus of instruction has been the foundational skills and teaching early readers how to read and write. But, now I'm in those classrooms and comprehension goes along with all of that because the main goal of reading is to understand. So I'm fascinated with this area. It's an area I want to get better at because I know that many things that we were doing in this area weren't the best methods either. So I think that, so many people go back and forth on social media. Oh, knowledge building is the most important. Oh, no, comprehension is the most important to teach skills and strategies. No, both are important. And I think instead of us all bickering online about, what's more important, let's get down and dirty and think about what are the best ways to instruct our students. And I want to hear.
Yeah. So Joan, going along with what you just said, I think that people think that teaching comprehension strategies is what they're used to from leveled reading, using those leveled books, the Fontes and Pinnell type of comprehension. So people have a bad taste from all of that because they feel as though, well, that didn't really work out so well. So I don't think they understand what comprehension instructional strategies look like. Quite honestly, when I'm going back and forth on Twitter with people, it's usually people who don't know very much, but they have a lot to say. they have opinions, but they haven't done the work. And so they come up with these things, and I think it's based on what they're thinking about the F&P type of ask a bunch of questions like what is the main idea. That is not teaching main idea.
And I'm gonna say I feel guilty because for about 20 years of my experience, it was a balanced literacy model, and we were just throwing so many questions at kids, and I never became an expert at how to teach comprehension as well as I could. So
I just love you that you're always so honest and, as someone said, vulnerable, right? So Joan, could you explain? So Judy is really an excellent coach, teacher, and she needs some help understanding this. So I'm sure a lot of other people do.
Yeah.
You explain that now.
Yeah. So I think a good place to start is what are, everybody talks about the components of reading, but if you look at comprehension, what are the components that address effective comprehension strategy? And there's 4. One is, yes, background knowledge. Either the more you can build, especially if, let's say you have young ones and you're doing text sets about the same topic, more you can build kids' background knowledge, great. But they're especially as you move up through the grades, they're never going to know everything they need to know about everything they read, right? And so the way that you address background knowledge is to do some previewing things with kids to try to activate what they do know or give them a little bit of it, in order to get them going. Previewing unfamiliar vocabulary, for example. So one of the components, background knowledge. Second component, vocabulary. It's the oldest finding in the research. Vocabulary is tied to comprehension. And so we have to grow kids' vocabulary. I could spend 2 days just talking about that, right? The third is text structure. Everybody forgets about that. But we know that when we teach students about text structure, it provides clues to making meaning, whether it's focusing on that, what an introduction, a conclusion is, whether it's, what little transition words are that give you clues to making meaning, the structure overall between narrative and informational. It even gets right down to paragraph structure. What is a paragraph, right? Which supports writing as well as, so that's the third one. And the fourth one is comprehension strategies. And there's been so much research about this. The National Reading Panel identified some of the ones that were the most effective. Summarizing hits the top of the list all the time, right? But so does things like teaching kids how to use graphic organizers, not the teacher giving it to the kids, but showing them how to generate them themselves, right? We know that not just question answering, but having kids generate questions, right? So there's a whole host of things that fall under strategies. So those are those four components. And my point in the article or in the blog post was to say, you wouldn't pick one of those and say, that's the only thing we should be doing. And that's my point. Background knowledge is one piece of this. Now, to your question about, you were talking about maybe folks who are used to maybe guided reading, that's what they think comprehension is. I think that's some of it. And Tim Shanahan, not too long ago in a blog post, talked about the difference between teaching comprehension strategies and just asking kids questions. All that does is like assess. You're assessing their knowledge. So an approach to, quote, teaching comprehension that's all about...
Joan, can we just stop you for a second? Faith and I really feel like hearing you on right now.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Thank you. So asking questions is not teaching comprehension. But I think some of what the misunderstanding goes back, I'm going to say to 1970s, right? Because folks who tend to knock strategies, sometimes part of their argument will go something like this. Worksheets that have kids practicing strategies are not useful. And I agree with that. So if you think back, and I'm getting old here, but, back in the 1970s, cognitive scientists believed that if you could identify these discrete skills, then if you taught them the way you teach, let's say, phonics, right? Like you took a skill, you drilled on it using a worksheet, that would work. And I remember in the 70s, at first teaching at Landmark, they bought a lot of these books called the Barnell Loft series. I don't know if
I remember that. Those little passages that were.
Yeah. So here's a good example of where an old approach to teaching main idea that was wrong lingers. So with those little Barnell Lofts, you'd have a book at different levels. And let's say it was drawing conclusions or main idea. So main idea, level F, you read a paragraph. It was perfectly structured, right? And then next to it, you had 4 choices. And the student was asked to read the passage and pick the best one. That has nothing to do with what really happens when you read and the way you need to know main ideas. I learned that very early on in my work at Landmark, even though that's what a lot of the teachers were doing, because my second year, I was assigned a group of high school kids that had discovered or had learned all of their foundational skills. They were fluent. And they were in a program called Bridging, where they were going to the local high schools to get their science and history and social studies. And I was given the class, and they just said, teach them whatever they need to get by in those classes. And so I very quickly learned that those little skill books weren't going to do it. So what did we do? they'd bring in the reading they had from their classes, and we would analyze it paragraph by paragraph. We would stop at the end of paragraph and say, what was the main idea? What was the gist? What's the supporting details? Let's write them down into 2-column notes. We're all done. Let's now summarize it using those. That's what teaching main ideas. It's much more linked, I think, to teaching close reading, where you showcase to analyze. So I think maybe the misunderstanding about what comprehension strategy instruction is yes, part of it is that it's just that they're used to question generation, but it's also this older worksheet mentality, I think, which doesn't work.
Yeah.
So.
It's so funny you mentioned Barnell Loft. When I moved to Long Island from Brooklyn and I started teaching in the Long Island schools, don't you think that's what I was given to use?
Yeah.
So that's, and that was, going back now 27 years, something like that. And you said they were from the 1970s. They were still using it in the 1990s.
Yeah.
And who knows how long it's been around. But yes, I'm familiar with that. So in the article,
Faith, I want to make a little connection here while we're on the subject of cognitive psychologists from the 1970s, right? What was happening then is there wasn't nearly the amount of research we have now, right? And so a lot of decisions that got made about teaching reading and writing were based on people's theories, right? Or people's notions about things. And to me, I think what happened then was a bunch of cognitive psychologists who were not teaching kids, right, but were studying about the way we think and process, said, oh, well, good readers do these things. So then the answer or the solution is we'll isolate those skills and teach them. And I think today, some of what's going on when something like an idea about the importance of background knowledge comes along, and then it gets turned into an interpretation, right? That then all of a sudden becomes a truth, which might not be, is again, we have cognitive psychologists, researchers, sometimes journalists who are not in the trenches with teachers that look at a particular study or 2 or 3 studies, right? Come up with beautiful interpretations, and interpretations are fine, but that's what they are, and they should be taken as that. Unfortunately, I don't know why it happens, but then what is an interpretation of what one particular study might be, and that study might be very small, right? I think a lot about people that refer to the baseball study, which was done a long time ago, and they basically had folks who knew a lot about baseball read something, and then folks who didn't know anything. And of course, the ones that didn't know about baseball would be harder to understand. But so to then extrapolate that and then build on that and say, so therefore the solution must be we should abandon time spent on explicitly teaching strategies and instead use that time to teach more science and social studies, which I'm not against. That's where I think we go wrong. And so I think just like that was wrong in the 70s around these ridiculous approaches to explicitly teaching skills with worksheets, I think you have the same phenomena going on here.
Yes. So Judy and I were bursting as you're talking, because as you're using a very kind way of saying it, an interpretation, Judy and I really want to hold up the BS button, because as far as interpretation goes, I think it's really a bunch of BS that they take something, and some of it, you said, could come from a journalist or a cognitive scientist or just people who are perpetuating myths. It's a bunch of BS, but they speak as though their, authorities on this topic, whether they call themselves curriculum experts or mavens or whatever expression they're going to use. So right now, that's a big yes, just letting people know. So now, Judy, in Joan's article, she had said, getting back to what we're talking about here, at the very beginning, she said, the growing awareness of the role of background knowledge in supporting reading comprehension has led some literacy professionals and journalists to proclaim that building background knowledge is the main solution to addressing students' difficulties with reading comprehension. So let's talk about what we're hearing now, because you're on social media and there's a lot of misinformation going on. And I think Joan clearly stated, and it's in her article, what I loved about her blog is there's so much research that she cited from 40 years ago and up, and to the most recent. So Judy, as far as what you're hearing in terms of these people who seem to say they're experts on a topic and pushing sometimes programs that that lead people into thinking that if they just buy this program, that just the topics alone are going to do the work. What are your thoughts, Judy, on this?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I think it's a bunch of BS. I think that BS starts during times of vulnerability. And I think a lot of schools are going through growing pains right now, right? Things are being mandated, laws are changing, and everybody right now is feeling vulnerable, including myself, right? We're seeing programs being implemented. We're seeing kids struggling in the field. We're seeing teachers struggle in the field. They're struggling right now, right? There's a learning curve when they're being asked to do something that's drastically different. And I think that depending on these programs as the be-all, end-all is a mistake. Because as a professional that's been working in the field for a very long time, there's no perfect program and there's no perfect curriculum, okay? Things change on a daily basis. We have to see what the learners are showing us they're getting or not getting. And the teachers still need to know and understand the what and the why. And it's really frustrating that so many people on social media are like, forget the what and the why. Let's just jump into like giving them something in a box that's going to work really well. Guess what? That's not going to work well. I am where I am today because you know what? I was a reading recovery person before. It was a big part of my life. And one thing that I could say was a positive thing about reading recovery, we really embraced pedagogy. Now, the problem with that was some of the pedagogy that we were delivering to kids now based on the science wasn't the best method. But that's why, because I didn't have an attachment to programs, I had an attachment to pedagogy, and the research is now saying things need to look different, and I shifted. And I know many people shifted as well. I'm on a journey, right? We sucked at teaching kids how to decode. The country sucked at it. For so many, and I still see the painful effects when I'm tutoring kids after work and I'm still seeing kids in the field guessing words rather than knowing how to decode, which helps meaning. It's problematic. So I think that we have to all really be cautious. And, initially I was the biggest cheerleader as all these programs and mandates were coming. I was like, yes, the bullshit is over. Things are finally going to get better. But now I'm thinking a little bit, maybe we should slow down a little bit and think about what's going on in those classrooms, what's working, what's not working.
Judy, I want to pick up on something that you said, and that is teacher knowledge.
Yes.
I don't know who coined the phrase first, but it's like teachers teach reading, and I'd say writing, not programs. And unfortunately, and we could do a whole session on this, right? We have too many pre-service teachers coming out of colleges, not having the background. And then for a long time, they didn't get any or didn't get quality professional development. I think part of this comes down to that teachers, number one, need the background knowledge. So, before I listed the four things that contribute and should be part of comprehension instruction, right? I mean, I don't want anybody listening tonight to say that I don't believe background knowledge is important. It absolutely is, right? But you're touching on that teachers understandably are grabbing for just tell me what's the program I should use that's the magic bullet. And you're right, there is no program that covers it all because all students are a little different. So number one, I think we have to arm teachers by giving them the background knowledge so that they can make these decisions, right? And I believe that in certain areas like comprehension, vocabulary and writing, especially like content writing, in some respects, you really don't need programs because and think about some of the research, even that came out of the National Reading Panel, right? That if we teach students to apply strategies, whether it's vocabulary or comprehension, right? And we are literally explicitly teaching them using real text related to subject area that they are maybe using in science or history, right? Then it's the teacher's knowledge of how you teach kids. Let's use summarizing, what it is, how you identify the main ideas, how you separate them from details, but more importantly, working with the kids within text to give that guided practice. You don't need a program with a scripted lesson plan. Now, on the other hand, I do believe that in the area of foundational skills, it's very hard to teach phonics without the materials and the scope and sequence, The other thing that we'll call them core reading programs, right? What they do is they do give you the text, Look, the core reading programs of today are better than the ones from Reading First because back then they were using anthologies of like little interesting articles and things. Now they are trying to get at the body of science and history knowledge that kids have to have. So that's a good thing. They are building background knowledge. But I guess to sum it up, it's like, yes, there are better programs in terms of what the kids can read and the way they integrate phonics and foundational skills into them. But that's not the only thing. That's not the solution. And for a lot of these skills around comprehension, you want to be doing it throughout the day in every subject, showing kids how do you do it with our social studies book? How do we do it with the science article?
Well, Leslie Laud, who was on here before, I don't know if she still is here. We had her on, and she talked about having those, powerful strategies, a set of powerful strategies to use throughout the day. And that's what you're saying. So what I'm hearing is you're both in agreement with this, even if maybe it's approached a little bit differently. That doesn't matter. I mean, the idea is the underlying message is we should have a set of core strategies and building up the science and social studies curriculum, which I have said from the beginning that, we never did that very well, science and social studies. That's been marginalized for years in favor of using that time for other things in the school day. But from what I read in your blog and from what I'm hearing and what I know, there should be strategies that kids begin to own on their own.
Exactly. So let's also talk about something that I think has been misinterpreted, right? I will sometimes read, again, maybe a cognitive psychologist, a researcher will look at and interpret some studies about comprehension strategies, and will say things like, it's shown that it only takes 6 weeks to teach a student a strategy, and any instruction beyond that is a waste of time. Okay, let's use some real examples. For example, anybody who knows my work, they know I'm a big fan of 2-column notes, right? End of summarizing. So I can teach a student in 5 minutes how to create a set of 2-column notes. That doesn't take long to learn. They can do that real well. But the underlying skills about when I'm reading something, what are the most important ideas and how do I put them into my own words on the left side of my notes? And then how do I figure out what are the most relevant facts? And then how do I write that concisely and paraphrase? These are all a whole host of underlying skills. That takes more than 6 weeks. Summarizing is the same thing. The other thing is that just because you've learned, a student can get independent applying a skill in 4th grade, right? When they move up to 5th and to 6th and to 7th, now the level of complexity of what you're taking notes on or what you're summarizing gets even more complex. And when you hit high school now, it's disciplinary. So this notion that all you need to do is teach 6 weeks and a kid will learn a strategy. It's real different than being able to apply it independently, which is why over time, if a school's got teachers, they all have similar training on a great bundle collection of vocabulary and comprehension strategies that get revisited year after year. That's what hits the independent. There's one other thought I had, and that is about, you mentioned before a lot of the work that I've been doing in terms of, when people ask me to do podcasts or do keynotes at conferences and stuff, has been around writing lately, right? But one of the shifts I'm trying to get folks to focus on is, what? We've got to stop talking about reading as a separate silo from writing, right? And that really they're integrated. Right. You mentioned Leslie Laude, and if Leslie, you're listening, I know that part of the training that she does, it is around having kids write about text that they're reading. When we have kids writing to learn, it infuses the two. And for many years, a lot of what I've now come to call comprehension strategy, because that's what the field calls them. In the early days, 70s, 80s, we called them study skills because they weren't just about reading. They were using writing and talking to help process and use critical thinking to decipher the big ideas in what you're reading, but then also putting them into long-term memory. So I just want to put a plug in that a lot of what we're talking about here, people are just think about reading comprehension, but it's really about writing to learn and writing to read, and then reading also supports writing.
Right. Well, what I think we've been hearing is there actually has been a shift from what I first heard a year ago. I think the journalists and other people who were only talking about background knowledge, I think after a while, and I hope Judy and I helped make that shift. I'd like to think we did, but they started to soften their position a bit. And I have recently started to see that people have been saying, oh, you need both. Where before it seemed like it was pretty much, background knowledge will take care of everything. Knowledge will take care of it all. And now we're seeing, oh, yes, strategies are important, but it's still being said as a secondary or something that you do in addition to making sure that, you have this knowledge building in place first. It's really not like you're saying, which came first, the chicken or the egg, having those set strategies that could be applied to anything.
Yeah.
So Judy, go ahead. I'm sorry, Joan.
So I think part of what may be causing more folks to say, wait a minute, there isn't like this one solution, right? Let's is that people are going back to the research, right? And even newer research. So, if you go back, and I won't be able to quote all this stuff. And I do encourage folks to go read the blog post because I listed like very clearly. But if you go back to one of the few IES meta-analysis reports we have about upper level, which was Camel et al., and they identified the 5 major recommendations. Well, the first, except for the last one, which was about for struggling kids, we need to make sure we do interventions with, fidelity, et cetera, right? The first 4 are all about what's called content literacy. And one of them is comprehension strategies. So you've got that going back to 2007. But look at the IES report that Sharon Vaughn et al. Put out in 2022, which was interventions for students in grades 4 to 9. Vocabulary, word study, and fluency, depending on, if the students need that, and then comprehension. And what do you see in there? All the strategies that, again, we have decades of research, but one devoted specifically to get the gist. So this is newer research that is replicating what the National Reading Panel identified years ago. You also have some of the newer studies. There's this one, and I might not pronounce it correctly, but Huang et al., right? It's often a study because in this research study, they looked at the effects of background knowledge and comprehension and a combination, right? And a lot of folks look to that study for the parts of it that say background knowledge versus no background knowledge, makes a difference. But if you then read on a little further, it says out of all the things that they tried, the best or the most effective was a combination of addressing background knowledge and teaching comprehension strategies. And then not only that, but what were the comprehension strategies that they looked at? One of them specifically was finding the main idea. So I think getting back to your point that maybe those who took the position of knowledge is the only answer, I think maybe softening because you can't deny the research that's there.
There you go. Can't deny the research. Judy, one thing that Joan put in her article that I thought was very interesting, she asked the question, so what is comprehension strategy instruction? And she wrote, there are decades of research on the positive effects of comprehension strategy instruction. There is sometimes disagreement about whether some of these should be labeled as skills or strategies.
Oh my God, I was thinking about that. That's so weird, Faith, that you knew exactly what I was going to ask. That's weird. That's weird. And this is live, so we can't fake it. We didn't pre-record it.
No,
we didn't.
This is only just winging it. But here it goes. There is sometimes disagreement about whether some of these should be labeled as skills or strategies. What we call them doesn't matter as much as the fact that research supports instruction for them. I just love that. And I wrote that in big letters.
No, I think I loved it more than you because do you know how many professional development sessions I've been at? And some of the coaches back then were like, oh, you need to know the difference. And I felt so uncomfortable. And my brain was like, is it a skill? Is it a strategy? It must be this. It must be that. And it became like that took over the whole conversation rather than thinking, what is the best method on how to do something so kids could do it? Yeah. People become so focused, hyper-focused on just the term and many people in my career have been like these know-it-alls, and then you feel kind of stupid at these trainings, like, oh shit, I don't really know. I'm not sure. But it was just so nice to hear that from you, Joan, because I respect your work. And there's just something so practical about you. You know, you have a wealth of experience. I certainly wasn't teaching in 1975. I started teaching officially in 2000 in the classroom at, sometime around that time. But like, you're so down to earth. And then to see that you incorporated so much research into your article, it was like, wow. And that's really helpful because I don't really have time to always find the research or look at the research. I'm starting to do that more and more because it's changing, what I'm doing. Like with Hegarty, we knew we were doing too much of the phonemic awareness and not connecting it to letters. So it's just amazing. But like, how do we get better at really knowing what's a skill versus a strategy? How do we not get caught up in thinking, are we right or are we wrong? And the other thing I wanted to ask you, Joan, is many of these things are really hard for like kids that are just learning how to read. And I'm seeing many programs in the field wants kids to produce a product, right? Ask and answer questions. And then they'll get worksheets that ask them and ask and answer questions, but now also require them to write it when kids might not even have those skills to write and formulate that, because it's really hard for little kids that are just learning how to read now write this. How do we determine the difference between skills and strategies, and B, how do we make sure that kids that are just learning how to read are successful at what these skills and strategies are asking them?
Great questions. I don't think there's a whole lot we need to say about the skills strategy, because I really don't care what you call them. Right? It's true. But I think Tim Shanahan's writes some great blogs, right? And sometimes he likes to stir the pot up, which is great, right? But he had one, I don't even know when it was. Do you call it skills or strategies? And you have a lot of fun trying to figure out, all right, how does he decipher it? Other people, but in the end, that isn't what matters. It reminds me a little bit like if you're working on trying to develop syntactic awareness for kids, right? Like, does it really matter that the kid can tell you that's a noun and that's a verb and that's a participle, whatever, right? No, what matters is that they can play with words to construct a sentence that's grammatically correct, right? So the labels don't matter. This issue of teachers don't have the time to read all the research, right? And yet it should inform what they do. That's, for whatever reason, that's what I've done in the last 25 years, right? Which is try to help teachers, give them evidence-based instructional practices, give them enough of an understanding of the research and where they can go if they want to read up more on it, right? But not spending all the time on the research on the theoretical models, because that doesn't translate, into what you need to do in the classroom. There was another point I had to, what was the second part of your question? Because you said about skills versus strategies, and what was the second part you
were? Basically, I'm in the field a lot, right? So I'm seeing a lot of programs getting implemented, and I see that, for beginner readers, they're, like point of view.
Yeah. I know. I know what. Yes, I know what I wanted. I know what I wanted to respond to. So, because you were talking about, well, what about the students? They can barely write or read. Like, how do you? And yet we expect them to create. So one of the things we also have to remember is the really important role of oral language. And especially if we're talking about the young ones, right? So if you have first, second, third graders and they're just learning transcription skills for spelling, right? And they're just learning basic decoding to read words, that doesn't mean that you spend all your time on those foundational skills and you can't, in writing, you can't move on to composing or elaborating sentences. And in reading, you can't move on to focusing on growing their vocabulary and introducing comprehension strategies. You just have to do it through oral reading, right? And through read aloud. So I think that's how you get around that issue. I have worked with, and I have been in classrooms with teachers that I've trained and others that Keys to Literacy have trained, where we have worked with little second graders to teach them the notion that we can think on different levels, introducing literally Bloom's taxonomy, that there's a difference between remembering and evaluating, and that teaching them how to listen to a reader out loud, or even just talk about what they had for lunch or the school playground. And can you create a creating level question about that? Can you create a remembering question? Can you create an analysis question about that. And by giving them a few of the terms, these kiddos are able, through their oral language, to create different levels of thinking. That's a really highly advanced strategy. One that the National Reading Panel said having kids not only answer but generate questions. Graham et al.'s writing to read report identified having kids create questions. So you can do this at the youngest level with kids. It's
if
just
you know, Joan. So like Judy mentioned, the programs are supposed to be evidence-based, correct? But yet the tasks in there that she's mentioning.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do an episode on tasks.
Yes.
And it's not just one program, a lot of programs.
Yes. And so it's, how are the teachers? Now you are mentioning things that I intuitively know. It's not like this is the, first time I'm hearing this. Oh, wait, let me just finish. So I think the idea is they're being told by these programs, right? Pick one of 3, 4, 6 programs, let's say, that are recommended. I don't know. It depends which state you're in. They get the programs thinking that the box is pretty much going to have everything they need. And then, they start and they see that there's a lot of extra material, a lot of extra things. They don't know what to sort out, what's important, what's not important. And yet, the most important thing are these core strategies that should be the basis of all the comprehension vocabulary work that you're talking about. And yet that's being sidelined because many of the, so-called experts, marketing people, influencers, journalists, whatever you want to call them, are kind of guiding people into thinking that these programs, you buy it, they're all evidence-based. But from what Judy is saying and from what I know, there's a lot of expectations in there that do not match what you're saying.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a good word you use, expectations, right? But let's bring it back to what we said a little earlier about teachers teach reading and writing, not programs. And there is no perfect program, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because the children in front of you are all individuals and differ from building to building, city to city, student to student, right? It's teachers having the knowledge of how you teach things explicitly. It also comes down to explicit instruction to be able to take that core and make it work for them.
Mm-hmm.
I a long time ago, I used to joke that if I was stuck on an island with a bunch of, 12 or 13-year-olds and all I had was a copy of Time for Kids, right? I could probably teach every single reading and writing strategy because you'd have some text to work with, but you have to have a lot of background knowledge to do that. So part of it is the teacher knowledge. The other thing is that oftentimes the programs, and this is especially true with writing, but it also happens with comprehension strategies, and I would say even vocabulary, right? Is they address those topics, right? So you could check off, yes, this has vocabulary, but they address it often by assigning tasks within the lesson with an assumption that the students have the skills they need in order to do that task, right?
Yes.
So for example, especially with the writing, you'll often see something like, now write a summary of the article. That's a great culminating task. But if the students don't know how to write a summary, there's nothing in there that shows them how to do that, right? Take notes. Well, if you haven't taught them how to take notes, or they'll identify vocabulary that they think are worth teaching in depth. And they might even have a few activities. They might have kids make a prayer. They might have it, right? But what's missing is the teacher's knowledge of how, if there's a word, maybe the textbook hasn't underlined it, but maybe it's a word that is essential. And because maybe half the students in your classroom are English learners, that this is a word, even though the program didn't say teach it, that you should teach it. well, what does the teacher know about direct instruction? What are the best practices? They don't know that. So the core programs identify the vocabulary, they give you tasks, and the same with comprehension. But I think ultimately it's not that so how do we write a better program? Because that's not the solution. It's how do we give the teachers the knowledge they need to make it bespoke for the kids that they're teaching.
It all goes back to teacher knowledge, and
But I
and never assume.
Yes.
So many people, Faith, but so many people on social media are like, oh, we don't have time to waste. It will take too long to inform the teachers. We can't do this. Yes, we can do this. Not everything has to be letters training or something that's so long and so intensive. We can catch teachers up to speed if we're intentional.
Yes. And you have to be realistic. Right?
Right.
And you also have to say, all right, let's shoot at least for the glass half full. So, I can give you an example around comprehension strategies, something that I have been doing for 35 years, right? The stuff that's in the comprehension routine, it started with 3 things that we pulled together with our landmark students, that if every teacher, besides the ELA class, but the science, social studies, math, even in art, right? If we all did these 3 things, and what were they? Use a graphic organizer, a top-down topic web, so that whatever you're going to teach or the kids are going to read, they see the big ideas, you talk about them, bring up their knowledge. While you're in the middle of reading or learning, you keep going back to it, and then you use it at the end to write. The second was 2 column notes. Just take 2 column notes on everything, and the third was summarizing. That formed this little bundle, which, again, the research says any single strategy will do, but if you give kids like a little toolkit, over the years, I then added also teaching kids to create questions. But those 4 things, okay, we have probably trained, I don't know at this point, thousands and thousands and thousands of teachers in those 4 things. It is simple training, 2 days. When we go back and we do coaching and implementation, sometimes we find, we actually did surveys on this, of those 4 basic things, what percentage of teachers were doing at least one of them 6 months later? And the numbers were pretty high. What about 2 out of the 4? Dropped a little. How about all 4? Not everybody's doing them. But you know what? If you're doing 2, think about what you can get kids to do. So the point is, yes, do I wish all teachers had the depth of background knowledge that, that you can gain if you take hours and hours and hours of training, right? But that's not practical. So we also have to be practical and say, let's start with a few of the most basic things. Look, vocabulary. Oh my gosh, there's so much you can do around vocabulary. But a lot of teachers don't have the time to go through days of training. But if you give them 2 or 3 of the most effective strategies or activities, and they start doing them, the other thing I think we need to do more of is stop thinking that this is the responsibility of the ELA teacher.
Yes.
This has to happen throughout the day. And if every teacher plays a role, a little example of that is one of the things around content writing that we often start our content writing training with teachers across different subjects, because we know they'll be able to grab it easy, is quick writes. Now, if I'm a middle schooler and I have 5 main teachers, and if every week, every one of those teachers did 2 quick writes, that's a 5-minute thing, right? Now, guess what? I'm doing 10 quick writes on the course of the week. But if the only person doing it is English language arts, then I don't get that. So I think part of this solution also is that everybody needs to play a role. Now, I'm not saying that high school chemistry teachers are going to teach intervention phonics. That's not going to happen. But can they play a role in strategy, comprehension, and vocabulary strategy? Absolutely.
100%. And we talked about this in Reading First, right? That was said years and years ago with the National Reading Panel, that every teacher is responsible for some of these things, that every teacher really is an ELA teacher, because they're all teaching kids to read their content area work. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, so let's wrap up. Judy, any questions, any thoughts, concerns before we finish up?
So, Joan, if somebody wants to get better and learn at least 2 amazing things in regards to comprehension, where are they going tomorrow?
I thought you were going to say, what are they? And I'd say like summarizing. Research on comprehension and on writing, like summarizing. So that's a big one. And that part of that is being able to identify main ideas. So that's the what. I also think teaching kids to take notes. And I think a basic, simple graphic organizer that you can repurpose for lots of things. Those are so easy to grab. Where do you learn this stuff? There's so much out there. I mean, look, that's what right now, that's what Keys to Literacy does. We train teachers. So yeah, use the Keys training, but there's so much free stuff out there. I mean, even at the Keys website, there are so many like recorded webinars that I've done both through Keys, for IDA, for Patan. I mean, there's a lot out there that if teachers as individuals, maybe their schools aren't going to provide professional development, you can do that on your own. So I think there's a lot of stuff out there. Yeah. I mean,
That's great. And then my other thing was, so you guys spoke about, that oral language piece, and that makes sense. But the problem is a lot of administrators and teams are asking students to produce artifacts. So how would you have proof of an artifact when you are, just having that oral language piece as the main way of assessing if students are getting a certain strategy or skill?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's think about, very early composing with writing. Kids do that through their drawings, right? So just like when students have drawings and then you have them use their oral language to explain what it is they have to say, and what the teacher it's dictating and the teacher writes it down. So yeah, but we also have technology. I mean, record kids' responses, have kids working in little groups where together as a threesome, they have to come up with 3 questions about the read aloud, and the teacher gives them some, little beginning question cards like describe, whatever, show, compare, and the kids are talking about it and record what they're saying to one another in the discussion. So I think there's ways to grab that. It's just that rethinking that we have to wait to teach kids and have them practice critical thinking skills and writing. Oh, you can't do that until they're able to read the words and spell the words and handwrite the words. We have to start building that stuff while the foundational skills are going on. And, Judy, your question could also be applied to our older, really struggling kids, the ones who have great cognitive ability. Some of them are above average, right? Intelligence, but because of the nature of their disability, they're still decoding at a 2nd grade. Well, it doesn't mean that you stop them from learning comprehension strategies and writing about what they're learning and growing their vocabulary by listening to really complex text. So the oral language is not just for the young ones.
Okay, so my question to you is, what about fiction? Because with this push for everything being, expository and knowledge building, and, you mentioned Shanahan, he recently wrote an article about stories and the importance of stories. Do you think that this push has kind of put stories on the sideline, that kids are not reading as, the literature that we once had given them years ago. I'm seeing that kids are just not reading stories anymore. Everything is about building knowledge, and that's important. But I also think character development and story structure, story grammar. We used to do this story grammar.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that in the magic box? I have no idea.
I mean, it should be.
It should be.
You know, I think if you look at the Common Core, and then now many of the states that have replaced Common Core, but many of them look almost exactly the same, right? That I think that's where some of that started. Recognizing that to have kids be college and career ready, if all they wrote was narrative and most of what they read was literature, that might not be. So that was one of the things that the Common Core brought in. But also during the time of Reading First, a lot of studies were done on really young kids about how their comprehension was fine with narrative. But once they all of a sudden hit fourth grade and for the first time were encountering informational text, they didn't know what to do with it. And so that also started bringing informational into read alouds. I think part of the answer is some of what I was saying before, that we have to look at literacy across the whole school day. And if you really look closely, if you look at like Appendix A of the Common Core, it will talk about how if we're shooting for 30% informational, 30% narrative, and 30% opinion for writing, and if we're trying to get a balance, right? Well, you could still do your literature in your English ELA class if during science and social studies and your other subjects, you're doing more informational there. The problem is, too often in those subjects, teachers are not having kids read and write a lot because the kids can't do it. So they're teaching the content through teacher lecture, PowerPoints, videos, because the kids they think they can't read or write, which they're right? And so the only place that they're reading is in the ELA class, and so that's one of the solutions. The other is, and I did read very briefly that recent post by Tim. There's literature and then there's literature, right? I mean, there's little fairy tales. I mean, all right, but a lot of narrative text is biography, right? There are lots of things in literature that can also build one's knowledge. So I think it's more a matter of what literature are you choosing? What are the texts that are being used, rather than just, oh, it's narrative versus expository. But yeah, I mean, it's like, and isn't that the theme of kind of a lot of what we started off talking with this about, that grabbing one particular thing, one shiny thing, and saying, oh, and then we all gravitate towards it, that everything has to be with moderation, and that you don't throw the babies out with the bathwater, right? So I think it's good we've brought in more informational text for a lot of reasons, but you don't want to then not have any narrative text. So all in moderation, all in moderation.
Well, Joan, this was such a pleasure having you join us. I can't thank you enough. Judy and I so appreciate your time, your intelligence, you have so much to offer. And I would recommend that everyone out there reads this blog, because this is not an opinion blog. This is based on tons of research that's cited. Joan spent, like she said, a year just kind of trying to gather this information. It took her a long time to pull from different sources and put it together in really such a well-written, concise blog with lots of research information for anyone out there. So anyone who disputes this, you better come up with the research like Joan did. So, Joan, do you have anything you want to add, or did we cover everything?
Oh, I mean, gosh, there's so much to talk about, right? But I think we hit the mountaintops. And And I want to thank both of you for giving me this opportunity to get what I felt I needed to say in this blog post out to others, because that's the main reason why I wrote it. I just was getting too many questions over too many months, and just felt like, yeah, let me answer it. So I think, given the reach with your podcast here, many more people will end up accessing it, and that's my whole reason for writing it in the first place. So thank you both very much.
Thank you. Judy, do you want to wrap up?
I definitely want to wrap up. And thank you, Joan, also for mentioning that writing is an important pillar. Make sure schools don't just focus on that reading, because I'm seeing too many kids in the field that can read, and then you ask them to write a sentence and it's like, holy God. Anyway, thanks so much. This was amazing. This was our first live recording. Faith was a little scared. I knew we could do it. Joan, thank you, thank you, thank you. We concluded our first live with people.
Yay. So all right. So
follow us on Facebook. You know where our group is. Also, go to our newly designed website, theliteracyview.com, where you could find all our social media platforms. Keep writing us that feedback. Write us some good reviews, and also follow Joan's website and all of that good stuff.
Keys to Literacy. It's going to be in the show notes. Keys to Literacy.
Kate, when are we releasing this episode for people that didn't stay on for today? Do you know?
I guess Friday.
Friday.
Okay.
All right.
So
unless we take out mine tonight, that could happen too.
Okay. So it'll either be tomorrow or Friday. We'll see. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Woohoo.